Good morning, my dears. This is Marlena Sobczak, and I welcome you to our political channel. In Polish politics, it's increasingly difficult to distinguish reality from the propaganda that the current government consistently wields over the public. Donald Tusk returned to power under the banner of responsibility, competence, and European normality, but in practice, we've delivered chaos, symbolic provocations, and financial ruin, the effects of which are beginning to be felt not only in budget figures but in the real lives of citizens.
We're supposed to see economic growth next year, 3.5%. Minister Domanski plans 3.5%, but at the same time, he plans that VAT revenues will be almost 9 billion less than this year, when we have a smaller economy and lower economic growth. A question for civic platform experts, for Mr. Domanski, and above all, for Prime Minister Tusk. Where is this money?
This isn't a matter of differing opinions, it's a question about the basic ability to govern a state. It started with gestures that were supposed to be innocent, but instead became an ideological demonstration. The Sejm, which, according to the Constitution, is supposed to represent the national community, has become the stage for ostentatious actions aimed at Polish tradition. When culturally alien symbols are displayed in public space while simultaneously marginalizing those that have built the nation's identity for generations, this is not ideological neutrality. It is a political choice. And Donald Tusk's government is making this choice consistently, siding with groups that have been saying openly for years that Polishness is a problem, not a value. We checked the posts of MPs, and here, a large portion writes, Happy Hanukkah. What's going on in this Sejm? I
mean, it's not happening in the Sejm.
Happy Hanukkah.
Yes, to Hanukkah. Well, let them have their fun and Hanukkah. I say Merry Christmas there, but that's not for another week.
But it's not just about symbols. They are merely a smokescreen for much more serious matters. The most dangerous thing is what's happening in public finances. At the end of 2025, the government, at the Prime Minister's behest, is sending letters to ministries and key institutions ordering a spending freeze. This isn't standard fiscal prudence. It's an admission that the state isn't closing its own budget. When the central government stops investing, when funds for development, health, and infrastructure are blocked, it means one thing: the state has entered a phase of financial drift. Donald Tusk and his finance minister are trying to pretend the situation is under control. At the same time, they are planning economic growth, which is expected to reach several percent, while admitting that revenues from the value-added tax will be lower than the previous year. Anyone with a basic understanding of economics knows that these two things are mutually exclusive. Either the economy is actually growing and generating higher budget revenues, or the forecasts are fictions crafted to suit political needs. Tusk's government is choosing fiction because it's the only way to survive several press conferences. The most glaring symbol of this incompetence is the fate of the Central Communication Port. A project that was supposed to be the backbone of the state's development for decades has been reduced to political ballast. Instead of fulfilling statutory obligations, we have audits, name changes, and narrative gimmicks. The attempt to rebrand this investment as something patriotic doesn't change the fact that the railway component has been brutally truncated, and the schedules have been pushed back by years. Foreign investors are withdrawing because they don't want to finance chaos and indecision. The same applies to energy, digitalization, and science. The government, which promise modernity, dismisses people who attempt to reform anything. Staff are selected based on party affiliation and loyalty to the leader, not on competence. The result is decision-making paralysis and the rising costs of delays. Every year of delay in strategic investments translates into billions in losses, paid for by citizens, not by government politicians. In this context, President Karol Nawrocki appears to be one of the last remaining brakes on this destruction. His opposition to symbolic provocations and attempts to strengthen control over public finances are treated by the government as an obstacle, not a fundamental balance of power. Attempts to block presidential candidates for supervisory institutions demonstrate that the current government fears transparency, fearing it would expose the scale of negligence and personal accountability. Donald Tusk has been building his position for years on the belief that his voters won't ask difficult questions. When the healthcare system is failing, when cancer patients are told they have to wait due to lack of resources, the government stokes emotions around red herrings. Sometimes these are moral disputes, other times media frenzies intended to conceal the fact that the state is failing to perform its basic functions. It's an old tactic, but it remains effective as long as the mainstream media is on the same team as the government. The right, including the Law and Justice Party, has long warned against this scenario. It's a return to a policy of warm water from the tap, which ends in a cold shower for the economy. Today, these warnings are materializing. The budget deficit is reaching levels that were considered irresponsible just a few years ago, and state revenues are lower than expected. Not only is Tusk's government failing to repair the country, it's accelerating its debt while simultaneously abandoning investments that could reverse this trend. Most disturbing, however, is the lack of any visible reflection or plan to exit the crisis. There's only name-changing propaganda, conferences, and the redirection of public emotions. The state cannot function based on a narrative. It needs decisions, courage, and a long-term vision. Donald Tusk's government simply lacks these. If this course doesn't change, the next year will bring even greater problems. A decline in real budget revenues, further spending freezes, and growing social frustration. This isn't pessimism. It's the logical consequence of policies that ignore the foundations of the economy and the national community. Poland needs governance, not managing an image crisis. It needs leadership that isn't ashamed of its polishness and isn't afraid of responsibility. History has repeatedly shown that states don't collapse suddenly. They slowly crumble under the weight of decisions postponed and problems swept under the rug. Donald Tusk's government is leading Poland down precisely this path. The question is how long citizens will continue to pretend they don't see this. The erosion of public trust in state institutions is also becoming increasingly evident. When the government assures of fiscal stability one day, and then quietly orders spending cuts the next, citizens are beginning to understand that they are being treated like extras in a political theater. This destroys not only the credibility of the government but also the sense of security of ordinary people. Entrepreneurs are suspending investments, local governments are postponing projects, and citizens are starting to save not out of choice but out of fear of what the future will bring. A state that was supposed to be predictable is becoming a source of uncertainty. In this situation, the government's narrative of supposed modernity and Europeanness sounds like a grim joke. Europe is not synonymous with chaos, debt, and the abandonment of self-interest. Europe also means strong nation-states capable of protecting their key projects, industries, and finances. Donald Tusk's government not only fails to do this, but often behaves as if Poland's development were an obstacle to the realization of other people's ambitions. Every delay, every abandoned investment, and every decision postponed distances us from true economic sovereignty. Therefore, the dispute over the country's future today is not an academic dispute or a partisan squabble. It's a choice between a state with ambition and a state that accepts drift and dependence. The right wing, Law and Justice, and President Karol Nawrocki represent a vision of a strong, efficient Poland, aware of its own interests. Donald Tusk's government offers in return fatigue, chaos, and a policy of irresponsibility. The sooner society understands this, the greater the chance that the current crisis will not become the starting point for a long-term decline of the state.
I believe that if this government has a positive rating above 40%, it is an exceptionally high result, one that I believe it absolutely does not deserve, and I believe one can vote for a coalition of the parties in power. However, I can still hold a negative opinion of the government, and I would like to encourage voters of the PSL Left platform to adopt this approach, so that they do not accept this level of governance as sufficient. I believe that the most glaring flaws, besides the lack of vision, the lack of any reformist zeal, are that we're not discussing any reforms here, because no reforms are being implemented. We're halfway through our term, and the Speaker and the MP are reporting that their deputy ministers, who tried to prepare something to change something, were dismissed, and are only now announcing that any reform proposals will be presented. Not when they took power, but 2 years later, when we're facing a very serious public finance crisis. So I think so. The lack of reform is the first issue. Then there's the very poor selection of personnel. This is particularly evident in digitalization, and in the education of institutions responsible for development. The next issue is the delay in strategic investments, which will cost us as a society billions. Multiply these years of delay, whether in the construction of a nuclear power plant or a central communication port, by 2. The acceleration is in your propaganda. Anyone who knows the schedule knows that these schedules have already been significantly pushed back. We'll have a nuclear power plant many years later, perhaps 10 years later. As a result of your hesitation, inaction, and your endless audits and changes in vision for the central transportation hub, we've lost a strategic, industry-based, foreign investor who was supposed to provide private capital. I wasn't involved in the creation of this investment. I'm talking about what the previous government did. Yes, we lost as a state. We lost as a state. Yes, and you can judge it positively or negatively. However, it was an industry investor who was supposed to provide financing. Right now, neither of those two things are happening. The confusion has already begun that we don't know how to finance it, but above all, we're behind schedule. Dear all,
Thank you very much for listening to our program. Let me know what you think about the topic in the comments. Subscribe to our channel and be sure to check out our other videos to stay up to date on Polish politics. See you soon, yeah!